the back lining was all that I had to tackle today, I would be grinning from ear to ear. After all, who doesn't love scallops? We'll get to them in just a minute. Indeed, no. There is still the small matter of the vent to contend with, and anybody who's ever sewn a vent before knows just how quickly and easily they can get out of hand. Nevertheless, the prospect of having my lining fully in and my front and back panels finally attached in some way is all the motivation I need to face my fears. And whether or not I can pull it off, by the end of the video, you'll know how to do it all too. So let's get started. I feel like scallops for breakfast. So first things we're going to do is just prepare our back panel pieces. Here I have them. It's our first time bringing them out. Welcome. So what these are just two cross-grain strips of pocketing. So cross-grain in the sense that they're cut horizontally as opposed to vertically, and they're just designed to reinforce the vent area. Measure the length of your actual vent, so from the hem up to the top. That's how long your strip's going to be. And then the width of the respective pieces will depend actually on just how much vent allowance you've left. What we're going to do is we're going to draw a line that is going to correspond to the stitch line down to the bottom of the vent. So obviously this is actually going to be left open and the stitch is only going to be up at the top of the back here. But if you just imagine where that stitch line would continue if it were to follow down, just chalk mark that on, and that's going to help you place where these pocketing pieces go. So on the left hand side, you're going to take your pocketing strip and you're going to place it on the inside of that line you've drawn, so within the panel itself and not what is essentially seam allowance. You're going to base that in place, as I've done here, and then you're going to slip stitch it. So again, using a fabric matching thread, and because this on the other side is just going to be the part of the jacket that's actually going to be visible, you don't want those stitches coming through, so really just taking a couple of tiny threads and slip stitching this in place permanently. Now on the other side, so the right hand side, you are going to do something different. You're going to take your pocketing piece and you're going to place it on the other side of that line, so kind of within the seam allowance. You want to have it so that there's about 1 centimetre or so. I had 5 centimetres allowance. I had a 5 centimetre strip, so I trimmed 1 centimetre away so I can see this little centimetre poking out here. If you don't necessarily want to get down and dirty with all the sort of basting, slip stitching, use interfacing, as ever, just try and use an interfacing that isn't really competing weight-wise with the garment fabric itself. Right, moving on. This is the right-hand panel again, and so this is the one where the pocketing is on the allowance side of the stitch line. If you think about how vent works, you have a sort of extending piece that comes out on the underside of the vent. This is going to be that side. So I've got that 1 centimetre sort of lip or fringe of garment fabric that was still sticking out. Folded that over now and I've pressed it, and I'm just going to sort of slip stitch or diagonal stitch that into place into the pocketing. These really shouldn't be coming through to the other side. When you're at the pocketing, obviously you can just pick up the pocketing and have a nice firm stitch, and you're just using your nice fabric matching thread for this. Your vent, it's obviously there to open a little bit, but you kind of still want it to be a stable feature and not either to crinkle or wrinkle or to just be too prone to open, and obviously you don't want it flaring or anything like that. And the reinforcement just helps it maintain a bit more integrity, both structurally and morally. So I've still got my hem allowance there, my 5 centimetres. I'm just going to stop before there. Okay, so we're going back to the left-hand side. We only want that extruding part to be on the one side, but obviously I cut these pieces on the fold, so they are identical. In this case, just want to sort of trim away the excess that for this side we don't need. You just do this to match your seam allowance. I could just trim it along my mark stitches there, which mark my seam allowance, but obviously I've got this inlay, I might as well replicate that there as well. So again, in my case, it's 2.5 centimetres, 1 inch. I'm just going to mark that on there, and then I'm going to trim it. So now that's just a clean seam allowance all along the back. Now we're actually going to sew up the centre back seam. This little lady's going to have a fair bit to do today, relatively speaking. I'll just lay these pieces out together. Okie dokie. To get the vent, I'm obviously not sewing all the way down. I'm also not sewing only to the very top of the quote-unquote vent itself, which is corresponding to the top of this pocket piece. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew a little bit further down, so about 1.5 centimetres down from there, where I've marked with this chalk line you can see, including my 1 centimetre seam allowance on top. That's 2.5 centimetres overall, or 1 inch. And I'm going to stop there and just do a hearty back stitch and make sure everything's nice and secure. And again, bearing in mind this is the stitch line, so once I'm down here I can use the edge of the pocketing as a guide. Sweet, let's go and press it. Okay, so press that seam open, nice and flat, and you can see all this beautiful mark stitching. For now, just turning to the left side, and I've folded that over and pressed it. And then I've folded up and pressed the hem as well. And I'm just going to baste both of these in place, but the hem only from sort of about halfway along towards the vent itself, because I want this to remain free to sew the side seams in a short while. I wonder if this thread is going to suffice. Let's see. Classic. Okay, so now that that's nice and secure and basted in place, I'm just going to, again, diagonally stitch this edge into place permanently. Again, just coming through the pocketing, not through to the other side. And now we have something rather exciting. So we've arranged our left side vent now, and we're going to turn to the right side. So again, this is the bit that's going to sort of hang underneath the left side like that, and it's going to give that coverage to our vent so that, but obviously we've got this seam allowance here and it's kind of crossing over. So what we need to do is snip into the seam allowance right up to the stitch line. So this is just along essentially what would be the cutting edge, and that's 2.5 centimeters up from where these seams stopped. Ooh, almost to the stitch line. And now this seam allowance can press over like that. That can flap whichever way it wants to, and the way it wants to flap is this way. So it's laying underneath the left-hand side. Let's turn to the lining itself. So as with the front panel lining pieces, I've just cut this, or rather these two panels, using my main pattern for the back. And as with the other pieces, I've just added extra allowance in specific places. So what have we got? We have obviously our 5 centimeter hem allowance added on. We have 0.5 centimeters along the side seam, just to add that extra little bit of lateral ease. 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters along the top of the shoulder. And then we have 1.5 centimeters along the neckline, although I think in my case I ended up only cutting 1 centimeter for reasons too stupid to mention. And then, yeah, the main event is here along the center back seam. I've added another 1.5 centimeters here, and that all has to do with the scallops I was talking about in the introduction. So no, don't worry, I haven't gone insane. What this is a specific type of seam that is going to allow us to have ease without having to actually just add overall width, if that makes sense. So I'm going to start for the first 2 inches or 5 centimeters, I'm just going to sew down normally. For the next 3 or 4 7.5 centimeter increments, it depends on how long overall your centre back seam is. Mine's relatively long, so it's 4. I'm going to do these little semicircles, sort of easing into that extra seam allowance I've just given myself back to the main stitch line, and like that. And again, what that's going to do is create these little bubbles of ease here, these little circles of ease, so that when I'm moving around, this seam is being put under tension, lateral tension. These little circles are going to give it just that little bit it needs to sort of relax, not tear, or, you know, whatever it might be. So it's a nice little elegant solution to that problem, I think. Anyway, so 1.5 centimeters extra along here. And then I think along the edges of the vent, I just did another 0.5 centimeters. Ultimately, that's just going to kind of fold over the garment vent. You know, I guess you could add more if you wanted, but I'm hoping this should be enough. And yeah, one last thing. So you can see here, this is the point at which I'm going to end my stitch. Now in this case, what I need the lining to do is for this stitch to end at the same height at which I snipped into the vent seam allowance a second ago. How do I know what that is? My vent height overall, and this is the same as the pocketing strips height that I cut, was 28.5 centimeters. The seam allowance on top of that on the garment fabric was 1 centimeter, so that's 29.5 centimeters, plus the 5 centimeter hem allowance, that's 34.5 centimeters. So this point is 34.5 centimeters up directly from the bottom edge. I feel like you can always tell when I'm just finishing my pot of coffee based on the frenziedness of my narration. Okay, yeah, so just sewing down straight for the first 5 centimeters. And now I'm just gonna ease round into this seam allowance like this. You might have to sort of do a little bit of walking. This is another one of those steps that just makes you feel like such a fancy genius, but it's also extremely fiddly and annoying. All right, almost there. Okay, so we've done our 4th now. I'm just gonna carry on straight down towards that point that I marked. So hopefully you can see there this sort of nice wave shape. Yeah, and if I turn it over, you can just see now that that will open like that. Cool. Okay, so this scallop shape means that I can't press the seam open, so I'm just going to press it over to the left side. Okay, so that's been pressed over to the left side now, and we just need to take care of the vent parts of the respective sides. So this is the bit that's going to go on the left hand side, so that's not including the vent extension. I'm just going to trim away a little bit of this excess, so just going to trim away about 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch. So this here is going to match the right side, and as before, we need to make a little snip into the seam allowance so that this piece can act independently of the seam allowance and fold over the corresponding part of the garment. And I'm actually going to cut this not straight, but as sort of diagonal and go more or less to the bottom of that stitch line. Being very careful not to snip the left part. Free as a bird to live a life separate from the seam allowance. So we've got the 2 sets of backs constructed now, so the lining and the garment one. So it's time to put them together. So you're going to lay down your lining block with the wrong side facing up, and then you're going to take your garment panels with wrong side facing down and line it up on top. Now this can definitely get very fiddly, you know, so if you haven't got inlay, you'll have the excess of the lining sticking out beyond the garment fabric, and you'll be able to tell, okay, yeah, the lining, for instance, is 2.5 centimeters longer here than the garment fabric, but in my case, I've also got this extra 2.5 centimeters for the inlay around the shoulders. So, I mean, on the one hand, I can also use that to say, okay, well, these edges need to match up. But other ways to help match it up is, obviously, I know that the hems are supposed to match here, and then I've also marked on the waistline notches, so they should also match, and obviously just make sure these two center seams are perfectly lined up as well. Okay, I think I'm about as happy as I'm likely to be with the placements of these. So first thing I'm going to do is base down that center back seam through both layers from the top of the vent just to the edge of the neck there. And yeah, as ever, just trying to keep things smoothed out, keep things in place as you're going. You know, don't, I think, spend hours and hours and hours and hours trying to make sure that these seams are exactly perfectly lined up. The main thing that counts for the immediate term is respective placements of the two vent openings on both the lining and the garment fabric. Okay, so the next step is we want to base the sort of ring basically around the centre back seam, and we want to always kind of keep a clearance of about 10 centimetres or a few inches away from all the edges, if not a little bit more. And we also want to leave some space away from the vent so that this basting doesn't get in the way of what we're going to do. As before, let's just make sure everything is kind of smoothed out in the direction that we're basting. I mean, even if you haven't done any ironworking, which I haven't done, it's quite likely that there will be this kind of rippling or excess because, you know, in this seam, for instance, there's like a curve on a flat surface. It doesn't necessarily have anywhere logical to go. Don't worry about it. These stitches are going to come out. Setting this position now while basting is not going to do anything with any finality. All we're doing is just keeping everything roughly in the position it needs to be while we, you know, sort out all these edges. Yeah, as ever, if there's any questions about what I'm doing or any tips or anything you think maybe I'm doing wrong or could we do better, please do let me know in the comments. And yeah, also if you're enjoying this or getting any kind of value out of it and your time investment in it, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As I'm sure I don't need to tell you, that's always a big help. It's a massive boost for my ego. And Lord knows there's nothing like amateur tailoring to damage the ego. The nightmare is over. Let's see what this looks like. So yeah, okay. So now it's time to do the vents properly, once and for all. Got our vents going on here. First thing we're just going to see to the left side vent, and we're just going to basically base that in place so that we have about 0.5 centimetre of the garment fabric still showing. And it's important here while you're folding to make sure that you're not accidentally borrowing fabric from this side edge here. Just make sure that you're leaving good clearance, a couple of centimetres above the actual jacket hem, because we're going to need to, you know, work with that. One more. Okay, so we've got that based in place now, so now we're just going to secure the right hand side in place and line this up in its correct position. And then what we're going to do is take this little bit of seam allowance at the top of the right vent here and just fold it down in this sort of diagonal shape. And then we're going to take some silk finishing thread, or, you know, your good fabric thread, and we're just going to back stitch through basically all layers but the outer layer of the left vent on the other side. So we don't want this to be a visible stitch on the other side. We just want to be making sure that we're picking up something but not going through all the way. So you've got your middle finger on the underside where the needle would be coming out if you were pushing all the way through, and just making sure that it never quite is. And now it's time to cover over this edge as we did with the other one. But the terrible and tragic revelation to make, which is this. On the lining, when I was sewing the centre back seam before, where I stopped was supposed to match up exactly with basically where this little triangular bit is starting now. So there, that's where this snip should have been in the lining fabric, and they're about 1 centimetre offset. But it's no great shakes. But what you would do, so you would kind of fold over this in a sort of triangular fashion. And again, in theory, the angle of it would be able to match the angle of this because you would have snipped them in exactly the right place. But mine's not going to do that. Mine's just going to sort of come over at a slightly odd angle. You're just going to take this other edge and fold it under as well. Again, you just want to make sure there's that 0.5 centimetre or so garment fabric visible beyond the lining. And yeah, you can then just base that in place. So we need to make sure we're starting or finishing, depending on which way around you're doing it, at the very, very least 10 centimetres up, so that this hem has room to fold up and that we also have room to fold the lining hem underneath it. Yeah, and just turning that top corner, you can base through all layers, it's not a problem. Maybe one more stitch. And what we're going to now do is join this with the front panels. What a thrill. First what I'm going to do though is press over, so fold over the 1 centimetre of seam allowance I have on each of these side edges so that it's ready. Say hello to my little fronts. Right, so I've pressed the side seams on the back panel lining, and you can see here that I've also drawn or chalked a white line, which is also corresponds to that 1 centimetre seam allowance, and that's just where the two edges are going to meet later. But for now what I need to do is just base these together and then machine stitch it. So there's no inlay here along the side seams of the back panel, but there is along these side seams of the front panels. So this edge of the back panel is lining up to the mark stitching on the side panel. And then I'll sew this from this back panel side just so I can have a good eye on what's going on there. Let's do it. So just using my 1 centimetre seam allowance here with these massive flaps of inlay hanging out the edge, just all the way down through the hem. So now just basting the other side, not catching any linings on the other side, and stitching it. So then, press both those seams open, machine's done for the day, then we'll bring this baby home. Okay, so it's a bit hard to tell from this angle, but it's all joined together. Before we move on and we put this all together, I should probably address a possible elephant in the room. Some of you may be wondering, Pat, aren't you going to do a first fitting? And this is an excellent question. The answer should be yes. And the time to do it would have been at the end of the earlier episode after we'd taped the lapels, and you would have just put the respective panels together much in the way I did with my toile, put the shoulder pads in, put the collar on, and address your fit from there. But you know, I skipped that step. Call it hubris, call it impatience, call it stupidity, call it one of those things. But I am going to do something to leave open the possibility for potential fit issues. I think if there are any, they're only going to really be relevant around the side and back seams. Yeah, I'm going to leave a little back door open for myself, and you'll see what I mean in a second. So first things first, I'm going to baste this lining closed. So this folded edge is going to meet that chalked edge between the two layers. Now, I know what you're thinking. I've just said, what if I want to get on that side seam later? Well, for now, I'm just going to baste it. It's not going to take a minute or two. What I would do if I were absolutely sure after doing the baste would be to slip stitch it shut properly with my silk thread, but I'll do that in the next episode once I'm absolutely sure that everything's right. So let's just baste. As you know, it's my happy place. So just going through the relevant layers of lining and nothing else. And you know, again, I'm relatively confident that everything will fit because I did have my toile fitting and I judged everything from there. But worst case, if I have to undo this basting stitch, I'm not gonna, you know, cry myself to sleep about it, whereas if I fully slip stitch it shut, that would take a lot longer to do than this, and you know, if I then have to open that up, then I really will have to cry myself to sleep. So, and I hate crying myself to sleep, friends. I just won't do it again. And I'm just going to also do a sort of lateral baste, a couple of inches below the armhole, and now onto the other one. I think maybe I was actually meant to go through all layers. This one, kind of forgot what I did last time, but let's just do that. Compare and contrast, I guess, between two sides. Okay, so now we're just going to return to our old friend the facing and double cross stitch the raw edge there down to the hem using our black silk thread. So the double cross stitch is the one with the cross stitch instead of bringing the needle to the lower point of the previous sort of X that you've made or cross, bring it to the middle between the 2 points of the previous cross, so it's just a bit more sturdy. And obviously we're going to do this on both sides. So what I'm doing now is a hem stitch on the jacket hem itself. So I've pressed this up and I'm just sort of taking tiny little threads worth on the garment fabric because I want to leave the side seam open for now, and it's already finished up here where the canvas is. I'm literally just doing these last couple of inches. This is the permanent closure of the hem. Okay, so I've finished the other jacket hem for now, and now what I've done is also press the lining hem up into its final position, leaving about 2 centimeters of jacket hem visible beyond it here. And what I'm doing is hem stitching that too. So taking a stitch from the jacket hem, folding back the lining hem itself, and taking it from further up into the lining hem than just the bottom. So I'm not taking it from the bottom here, I'm taking it from a couple of centimeters up. And what that means is the lining itself will then be able to sort of balloon up like that, and it just allows more up and down ease. Same sort of thing, I'm stitching through the jacket hem and taking just this thread out of the lining or so. Very important not to go through all the layers of the lining, you just want to catch that under layer that's folded under. And again, I will just do a couple of inches here from the vent inwards. I'll leave the side panel fully undone for now and basically just do from this side seam here to the end of the facing. So this bit will remain loose if I need to make any alterations later. So it'll pull up like that, and I've got that extra up and down ease there. So just matching up the lining seams with the respective jacket seams here. And bear in mind, you will have a bit of ease that you'll have to distribute within the lining hem because the lining piece is fundamentally bigger than the corresponding jacket piece. Okay, so I've done the other lining hem, and now it's the very last step, and I'm just prick stitching these vent lining edges shut. And the prick stitch is a decorative stitch. Think of it basically like a back stitch, but kind of on a point. So you've taken a stitch and you're just going to come back and across ever so slightly from where your threads come out. Push through all the layers you want to. So in this case, that's basically all layers, but the actual outer garment layer, so it's not going to show on the outside. Come out at a sort of regular interval, in this case, say 0.5 centimetre ahead of yourself. But yeah, you'll see. There's these sort of decorative points. And just using your finger there, holding it on the underside of the vent, which is the outside of the garment, and just making sure your needle's not coming through. And it's only going through all layers but that last one. So, we've done vents, we've done linings. We've really learnt so much. Wedding bells are ringing. If you may be wondering how to start your own tailoring project and you're not sure how, you can click here. And if you're just checking in on the wedding suit journey for the first time, you can find episode 1 where my face is. Otherwise, if it's already next week, you'll find there the next episode. Till then, Have a good one.